Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The value of WiseTech Global fell by about $8 billion over the last 3 sessions after media reported allegations of inappropriate behaviour by founder and chief executive Richard White. The allegations are unproven, but the ongoing headlines around the billionaire are clearly affecting investors. The logistics tracking company isn't the only one dealing with the crisis of culture right now. Nine Entertainment last week released the Intersection report detailing confronting allegations from staff about the abuse of power, bullying and sexual harassment. And Mineral Resources senior management have also been caught up in a tax avoidance scheme, or at least an alleged tax avoidance scheme. It's further proof of the importance of culture in a workplace, because having an environment where employees are safe and supported is not just more productive, it has a material impact on the company's bottom line. Gerard Murphy is the co-founder of Performance by Design. He's been a leading management consultant in Asia Pacific, Europe and North America for more than 2 decades. Locally, he's worked with companies like Westpac, Nissan and Bunnings. Gerard, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Hi, Sean. Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Do these stories that we hear about Nine and WiseTech and Mineral Resources, but there are plenty of others, do they surprise you that we're still getting these stories in 2024?
The answer should be yes, but the truth is it's no. And so often we see it when we're working with companies that if the staff or the employees or the team aren't comfortable enough to speak up, or we haven't created that environment of trust, then what happens is we get to a point where it just goes on and people can see it happening, but they're not prepared to speak up. And as a result of that, you end up in scenarios that you've just described. So the answer is it doesn't surprise me, which is really disappointing.
How difficult is it when people at the top are doing the wrong thing compared to people in middle management?
Oh, it's terrible. It's so difficult because the truth is, who wants to really call out the boss? And even at a positive level, so we do a lot of work in professional sport, as you know. And if the head coach is doing a great job, often they just don't get feedback. So it's even difficult to give positive feedback. Giving not so positive feedback is super difficult. And that's why it's really important that boards and executive teams set up a really clear set of behaviours so that it makes it okay for us to say, hang on, I'm not really sure if that's right. Because by definition, we would describe a high-performing team as a group of people that feel safe to give and receive feedback, to ask for help, to ask questions, so that it doesn't matter what the scenario is. We can just say, hey, hang on, Sean, is that the best way to do it? And if it's not, can we fix it up? But what you find when you've got an environment where people don't feel safe to speak is that the unacceptable behaviours just perpetuate and often become worse.
So what's the first few steps in creating that? I mean, it's not something that you can do overnight. It takes trust. I'm sure Performance by Design, you spend a lot of time with sports teams, but also corporates talking about this sort of thing. How do you start the process? How do you just kick things off at least?
Yeah, it's much simpler than people think. So in essence, you get the executive team together, and because it always has to begin at the senior level, because if it's no use the teams in -1 or -2 level in a corporate structure doing their best, but at the executive team, some of the behaviours are unacceptable. So we would always start with the executive team and basically do a quick audit. You know, what's our purpose? How do we want to be described? How would we be described now by ourselves and others? And then in the future, in an ideal world, what do we want that to look like? And so once you've done that audit, then you start to look at the behaviours that we believe are acceptable or unacceptable. So it's about the group then putting in place, I guess, a code of conduct. We call it a culture code, so that they can operate within that. And then having set up our rules of engagement or our culture code, we would then start to work through, okay, do you understand yourself? Because leaders who lack self-awareness, they are the biggest issue. Because what happens is they think that they are behaving in a certain way, but the truth is other people are seeing that differently. And when you get that gap, that's where you get a real breakdown of leadership. So we would say get clear your rules of engagement, i.e. your culture code, your behaviours, conduct some sort of profiling so that you understand yourself and others. Take some steps to build some really good relationships so that you know a bit more about your teammates, because it's much harder to treat people that you know well and respect badly. So building those relationships and then undertaking, I guess, formal, structured conversations about performance so that people start to feel safe to have conversations, and so that it's not giving and receiving feedback. It's not a big deal. It's just actually saying, hey, can we do this better? And once you've got that in place, you then can start to put in place systems that allow this to continue on a regular basis. And again, I think that's one of the things that sport does so well, Sean, is that it puts in place systems of review, systems of feedback and conversation that allows us to continually question and reward good and not so good behaviours.
Stay with me, Gerard. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Gerard Murphy, co-founder of Performance by Design. It's kind of interesting, the idea that review day after a game in sport is always a very big day. It might be the next day or the one after, and people are expected to have watched the video, and they sit there and they discuss, the good, the bad, the ugly, but it's a very open culture generally. Do corporates ever do that? Kind of every month sit back and say, hey, what have we done? What haven't we done? Because great sporting teams do it all the time.
Yeah, we don't do it often enough in the corporate world. And I think if boards ask the question of their executive team, do we regularly conduct reviews? And we clearly can't do it as often as we do in sporting teams. But if we regularly conducted reviews about what we were doing well and what we weren't doing well, particularly against our behaviours, so that's the cultural piece, then we would start to pick up things much earlier. And I think what our process does is it allows us to grab little things and stop them from turning into big things. It stops that creep, because culture doesn't change quickly necessarily unless you have some catastrophic event. What it does, it just incrementally decreases. Mm-hmm. And then one day you wake up, like some of the companies you've just mentioned, and you go, how the hell did we get here? This is what could possibly have gone on that's allowed us to get to this point? And it's because it's slowly diminished over time.
What about if you take the 9 example, and we have more details on that because there was an internal report which was released. There's obviously a toxic culture in pockets of 9. How do you start fixing an organisation like 9 where there are, a bunch of good people, and I don't know the numbers, but let's say 90% are really good, 5% are bad, and there's 5% somewhere in between. But, by far the large majority of people are hardworking people. How do you get rid of that toxic culture?
Well, it goes back to, and if you don't mind, I'd probably prefer not to speak about 9, but
no, okay.
Every organisation has subcultures.
Yep.
And so you have to be able to work through where are the dominant cultures and where are the not so dominant areas. But I'll just keep going back to the top. You've got to clean up your executive suite. Like the C-suite they have to be good people. They have to have clear personalities. They have to be authentic leaders. They have to be trustworthy. They have to deliver on their word. Like they're all really simple concepts, but they're hard to get a really strong group of people that come together with that absolute focus on organisation ahead of self first. And we often talk about trust being, have you got the skills to do your job? And in an executive team, the answer is yes, because you don't get on an executive team unless you're technically good. But the one that brings us undone is I put myself ahead of the team. So it becomes more about me. And so if you think of trust from a technical or a cultural perspective, really focusing in on what are our behaviours, what's acceptable, and then you can go to the trust bank or the trust bucket. Like we overcomplicate trust. And so if I do good things for you, then I make deposits. If I do inappropriate or unacceptable things, I make withdrawals. And so the trust bank account will go up and down all the time, but our executive team have to be beyond reproach when it comes to trust. We have to look at them and go, yes, I trust that they can do their jobs, and I trust that they are good people. And if we can get that, we're in a good place.
We are out of time, but I actually want to ask about blokey culture. And this goes from Donald Trump through to what was reported in Nine. And part of that is, without making any excuses for it, it's a function of the individuals themselves because they are blokes. It's how they've been brought up. It's how they think. Without putting a value judgment on that, how do you change that?
I think it's really simple. You get more female executives in those teams.
Yeah.
Like those days are just gone, and that I think that's why it's so incomprehensible that it still occurs. So we go back to where you started. Are you surprised these examples have happened? The answer is no, I'm not surprised, but I should be. And I think we have to keep speaking up, and probably particularly as males and male leaders, we have to be able to put our hand up and say, hang on, no, I think that's unacceptable. And at the same time, absolutely increase the numbers of female executives on executive teams. Like we work with probably about 10 companies where we've got female CEOs, and it changes in a heartbeat because the people can see, hey, there is another way to do this.
Gerard, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
No worries. Thank you so much.
That was Gerard Murphy, the co-founder of Performance by Design. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.